Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the module Gadamer's Hermeneutical Epistemology in the paper Epistemology 1, and this module is written by C.B. George of IIT Bombay. I am Raghuram Raju. I teach philosophy at University of Hyderabad. One way to begin this module is to recollect the pervading philosophical mood or activity during the time preceding Gadamer and others. There was a very important school of modern philosophy began by Descartes, which centered rationality and knocked down anything that is not reason. The reason why he centralized reason and excluded non-reason is that reason can only give you certainty. And for Descartes, knowledge without certainty is not a reliable one. So Descartes was not merely looking for knowing things, but knowing that gives you certainty. So please remember that there is a very important condition that Descartes places before the philosophers subsequently, namely, knowledge has to be certain. And if it is not certain, then there is something unreliable about that knowledge. So he said that reason is central, and the reason for him is not the kind of reason that was there for Plato or even Aristotle. Reason for Descartes is instrumental reason, where there is a causal relation between cause and effect, and it is presented and understood in a very formal way. To this, a over-emphatic and highly reason-dependent knowledge, you have somebody like David Hume, who comes to scandalize this rationalistic project when he said that reason is the handmaid of passion. So immediately he glorified all that was marginalized by Descartes, and that became a sensational, a standpoint or philosophical view. So you have two important philosophers. One is the rationalist Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, and then David Hume, the father of counterculture, who has scandalized rationality. Now you have this as a background to the philosophers in 20th century, and even before that, the Humean counter philosophy that scandalized reason has its followers in the form of Nietzsche, Derrida, Rorty, and others. These philosophers proclaimed the end of philosophy. Though Gadamer is a part of this radical movement against Cartesian epistemology, which is also talks about representational theory of knowledge, that the subject represents the object which is there. Gadamer does not take recourse to the end of philosophy trajectory towed by others like Nietzsche, Derrida, Rorty. Gadamer is more sober and more responsible. He embarks on a path which seeks to correct this excesses that are before him. So it is this kind of background which was there in front of Gadamer. Traditionally, hermeneutics was a method or methodological approach to texts, especially sacred text, and you have this tradition initiated by Bultmann. But then there is somebody called Delphi who came up with a method to use hermeneutics for human and social sciences. Heidegger came up with a hermeneutics which problematized the human ontology. Gadamer uniqueness lies in asking this fundamental and foundational question, namely, how is understanding possible? So it is not that I am a subject and there is an object and I represent that subject. No, that one-to-one correspondence, that causal relation is not acceptable to many others, including Gadamer. Gadamer says that this activity is associated with this aspect called understanding. For Gadamer, understanding is not just an instrument. It is not that there is an object, I understand the object. No, understanding for Gadamer is ontological. Okay. It is not instrumental, it is ontological. It is the original characterization of human existence. It's constitutive of human existence. Gadamer says that though understanding constitutes the human existence, it has the capacity or a quality to transcend that existence and move beyond that predicament which is given to its constitutive stage. So the intentional relation of human being with the world is governed by the hermeneutical aspect or the understanding activity. So understanding, which is central to Gadamer, has three meanings. The first one is, according to Gadamer, one knows one's way around what is understood in terms of its meaningful possibilities. So there are certain things that are given to mean, and then there are certain meaningful possibilities. Not that every possibility, there may be many possibilities, but then there are meaningful possibilities. The very essence of human existence is the interpretative activity. So I have certain things, and those things have certain range of meaningful possibilities, and then I am endowed with the interpretative capacity to interpret these activities. These interpretative activities can be in the form of speeches, can in the form of semiotic words, or can be in the form of texts. So for Gadamer, the corpus of understanding is related to the realm of possibilities, but not all possibilities, but meaningful possibilities. Further, understanding for Gadamer is not merely about the possibilities, but also in terms of past or history. Please remember something very interesting that Gadamer is making here. Now, if you give me an object and I might have a knowledge of different possibilities to use that object. That's fine, but that is all in the presence. But please remember that if I know the history of that object, the past of that object, then I will not only know various other uses of that object, but also the sacredness of that object, the history of that object. So it is not merely the instrumentality of the object that gets increased when you bring or factor past and history of an object or the world. So just take a very simple and maybe sometimes, simplest example. Take the thing called disposables. You dispose, there are certain things that you just disposable. There are disposable syringes, there are disposable tissues, there are things like that. It looks as if disposables are something that are just instruments for my use. Yes, they are instruments for my use. But suppose if you look at a disposable which is in front of you, bringing the notion of history and the past of that object, then you will know that it is a product of, or it is a modification or refinement of a large chain of activities human beings have arrived at in the past at different stages of history. So maybe first of all he must have, or she must have used, leaves which are also disposable. Then they must have confronted the problem of the everyday going and collecting leaves to eat. So they arrived at something which is a pot, which can be cleaned and then reused again. And then pots can be broken. So you come across metals that cannot be broken. And then different fashions, and then some of them may have strains. So you go for a porcelain ones so that they can be cleaned properly. So various kinds of things. And then something like that, if you use the same thing for by different people, it might have certain kind of health problems. So now we come up with a disposable there's a long trajectory. It is not coming back to the leaves. Disposables that we use today are not coming back to the earlier thing. There are different stages of human intervention that worked out different combinations. So even a smallest thing like a disposable tissue, if you look at that object from the point of view of the past and history, it will look to you differently. The term disposable will make a different meaning and sense to you if you factor the history of the term in relation to its allied terms. That's the point that Gadamer would make. So Gadamer would say that just words are not reference to an object. Objects are just not there, just as crude objects. All of them have a history. Words have history. Unless you factor that history, you will not be able to get the range of non-functional, non-instrumental uses of the object that you are using. And that long spectrum, broad spectrum, enriches your understanding of even the simplest thing, the example that I just gave it to you. So he would say that is the important resource, richness associated with hermeneutics. Now, having said this, the point that we need to remember at this juncture is, in associating a word or a sentence not only with the present but also connecting it back to the past and history, Gadamer is not saying that it is all that is there. It is all that is there. That is, it is entangled to the past and it gets imprisoned in the past. It becomes specific to historical events, and then it is entangled to them. Gadamer does not agree to this position. He, on the contrary, says that there is something called prudence which supposes the community, hence it has an ethical dimension. So there is a larger than the contextual kind of a thing. So an object that I have, the words that I have, are not merely something that are given to me as facts or as words having specific meanings. They all get imbricated in a community, and since the words or sentences, text are imbricated in a community, they come to have an ethical dimension. For Gadamer, this community, this ethical dimension makes understanding have the aspect called agreement. So for him, understanding is also agreement. But this is not merely objective nor merely subjective. When I say that I agree with you, it does not mean that for my point of view, I agree with you, or you have coerced me to agree with you, so I agree with you. It is not that. It is not merely subjective nor merely objective. Agreement is as much as it is grounded in a linguistic community. Agreement is not something which is neither subjective nor objective because it is rooted in a linguistic community. My standpoint also belongs to or is informed by the linguistic community. So the application of the is a mediation between the past and the present, as I mentioned to you earlier. But it is also, says Gadamer, an act of translation. That when I say something, when I interpret something, I'm not just interpreting my own point of view. I'm translating that to you. I'm applying the original in the new context in the mode of translation. So when I translate, I'm not just doing one-to-one correspondence, like just, saying the same thing in the same way in a different language. That's not translation for me. It is restating the original in a new context. That is the crux of the hermeneutical exercise. Okay, so according to Gadamer, the primordial truth which is associated, which has this dimension called understanding, hermeneutical feature, is deeper than the scientific truth. This is an important point, because most often we think that scientific truths are the only truths and often forget the large body of the historical knowledge human beings had before we became we arrived at scientific truths and things like that. So for Gadamer, truth is primordial, and there is a scientific truth that came later. So let's not just equate truth with scientific truth. What we had earlier also is a truthful thing. Truth is not merely a methodologically verifiable thing, as the positivist argued. It is not merely a cognitive or an objective relation to the world. That when I talk about truth, it is not that I cognize the object, or the object is there and I have an objective relation with the world. That's not merely the truth. Truth is very, very primordial, and that's the important thing. Now, the reason why it is primordial, and to show that the primordial nature of the truth, he brings three important elements. Let us begin with two of them. One is language, the other one is tradition. And he says that we are structured by tradition and language. Acceptance of tradition for Gadamer, or acceptance of authority for Gadamer, is not a mere passive act. It's not that, if I am a traditional person, I operate traditional within traditional discourse, or I accept authority. It does not mean that I am a passive follower. I'm not a slave to a lord or a mere disciple to a master. I can be very critical. I can exercise critical appraisal of what I accept from tradition or the authority that I obey. In other words, between non-acceptance and acceptance of tradition or authority, there are intermediaries, and that spectrum is very vast. So he would say that I might accept and negotiate. It is not a blind adherence to tradition, but a critical engagement with it. This critical engagement should be factored when we look at our dealing with tradition and language. Okay, along with the language, the other important aspect that Gadamer talks about is that truth is a play. It's a dialogue. That it is not that there is something that I say and then it's taken. I also can talk to you what I believe to be true. Okay, and when I talk to you what I believe to be truth, you might disagree with me. You might accept with me. You may disagree with me. You may partially agree with me, partially disagree with me. And I will either continue to accept what I hold, or change or modify my belief after taking a feedback from you. So there is a mediation through dialogue where truths can be modified. Truths get changed, and truth gets different dimension. Truth can grow. Okay. So for Gadamer, meaning is not merely an individual exercise that I think it is this or it is objective. It is common and universal, yet entangled to hermeneutical exercise for the reasons that I just gave just now. Truth that emerges from genuine dialogue go beyond the will of the interlocutors. And he says, in Truth and Method, it is a genuine conversation is never the one that we wanted to conduct. So there are surprises that when I enter into the conversation, it is not that I have a script and I read the script to you. It is not that you have a script and you read the script to me. Now, I begin maybe with something that I already want to tell you, but after looking at the reaction from your side, I may not repeat what I wanted to repeat, what I decided to repeat earlier, what I prepared to repeat earlier. I may change entirely because of your response to what I said in the first place. If I don't, then there is something wrong with me. Then it is not a conversation, it is merely reporting. Then it is not a dialogue, it's merely, repeating what I have already come to, tell you. That is not the important aspect of dialogue. So dialogue for him is something which comes up with surprises, which will throw up aspects that you never thought about, because this is all mediated by the other person's intervention. And then you might respond, and that person also might face the same situation, or in saying not what he already wanted to say, but say that which is appropriate. So that is a surprising aspect, that human element, that sense of presence is what sustains a dialogue. That is a very important aspect or domain, horizon for Gadamer to look at various dimensions of understanding or hermeneutics. As I already briefly alluded to earlier, does this anti-objectivism of Gadamer lead to relativism? The immediate answer from Gadamer is no. And the immediate and simple answer is that it does not lead to relativism because it is rooted in history, tradition, and language. And all of them are not merely subjectivist. Okay, so opposing objectivism of Cartesian representative theory of knowledge does not lead to relativism. Gadamer rejects the epistemological foundationalism, which is a very important point that all of us know, that he doesn't accept the essentialism, because for Gadamer, foundation of history and language cannot be known. They are primordial. They cannot be known. It is not that there is a human being and then he comes to have knowledge, and it is not that there is a human being and then he comes to have history. By the time he comes, he already has a history. So history and language predate human being both ontogenetically and phylogenetically. Though Gadamer has not used these words, I think they can be used to explain the point that he is making. Gadamer makes an important point where he says that he is committed to fallibilism. That the fallibilism is an awareness of the possibilities of our knowing going wrong. Okay. This is very important. The reason why it's important is it makes knowledge human. It really weeds out that disguised divine aspects associated with knowledge, that knowledge means not going wrong. False knowledge is not knowledge. He says, no, that is not the nature of knowledge. There are places where in the act of knowing, you can go wrong. You can make mistake. But then that making a mistake should not deter us from branding that as non-knowledge. It is indeed knowledge, and because you can go wrong, you can correct. And in correcting, you get back to the old knowledge and revisit what you thought was correct truth, and then now correct it. So there are two kinds of knowledges that are possible. One is moving from an untruth to truth, moving from what you thought is truth but untruth to truth, and then finding out new truths. Look at the three kinds of gradations. That is the important point that is available to us. That is, again, I repeat again, moving from untruth to truth, moving from what you thought to be a truth but actually an untruth to truth. The other one is moving from one truth to more truths. These are the very important range that you find in Gadamer, and they are the ones, that's the reason why one can actually find the profundity in Gadamer accepting the fallibilism of human understanding. Another important point that we need to deliberate about Gadamer is his understanding of horizons. Horizons for Gadamer are like boundaries. They are the ones which will make our understanding finite. So Gadamer says that finite understanding is called by Gadamer as horizons. Now, for Gadamer, there cannot be truth without horizons. In other words, he is attacking the people who associate truth with infinity, truth with absolutism. He is saying that truth cannot be absolute, truth cannot be unbounded, truth cannot be infinite. Truth has to have necessarily horizons. It has to have certain kinds of boundaries. And without horizons, there cannot be truth. So that is a kind of a place Gadamer assigns to truth. So truth is very, very closely related to horizons. And though horizons give us the impression as if they set the boundaries, they make truth bounded and they don't accept the unbounded notion of truth. That's something that might stun somebody, about his version of truth. But there is something that he further adds that will dispel this doubt. And what he adds is, for him, horizons are not closed. Horizons are there, they are not closed. Like you have a house, and the house is, has a closure. It demarcates, you demarcate, it's not an open space. But then there are windows and doors. You can get inside. So it is in this sense, he would say that the horizons are not closed. It does not mean that truth is unbounded. Truth is open. Truth is surrounded by horizons, but the horizons are not closed. They are not closed, and the yet another aspect of the horizon is they are dynamic. In other words, they allow interaction. They grow internally. They also learn, interact with other horizons. I'll come to it in a moment about the interaction between two horizons. They are dynamic. So in other words, it is not a closure. Horizons is a closure. It is dynamic. Also, it moves. It's something that moves from, it becomes a bigger horizon. When it becomes smaller, and smaller horizon can become bigger, and it can change into one version, it can change into other version. So that dynamism, that movement, that change is associated with the notion called horizons. So they have openings, and why do they open? As I said, they are not closed. They open. They have openings. But what do they do in their openings? They do two things. One, they incorporate what is not in them. So there are a lot of gaps in a horizon, and they get incorporated. And then that could be either necessitated by internal growth or dictated by or learned from the outside. For instance, I don't know a language, so I learned the language from the other persons. Now, internally means when I was born, I didn't have teeth. Okay, but internally it gets filled up and I come to have teeth, and then I bite. I can chew food and things like that. So the horizons which are opens have both dimensions. One, it facilitates the possibility of an internal growth of filling up things or even shedding up certain things, also learning from the other. the last point, which is very important and for which Gadamer has become very, very famous, is fusion of horizons. This is the very important point that makes the cross-cultural understanding possible. So for Gadamer, that one horizon can fuse with the other horizon, and it facilitates the interaction between two horizons. It will, through this act, will save a horizon from relapsing into solipsism. Because of the interactiveness with the other horizons, fusing with the other horizons, it doesn't relapse into solipsism. It also has this dynamic aspects of intersubjectivity, and that is one of the important aspects that you find in Gadamer. It is through this horizons, the idea of understanding, the notion of truth, the fusion of horizons, Gadamer makes sure that his philosophy does not relapse either into subjectivism or mere objectivism. And he traverses an in-between of this subjective-objective by locating understanding as ontologically prior to human existence, as a primordial aspect. And for him, understanding not something that you acquire later. It is something that you are there from the beginning. That's an important thing. So to sum up, though he rejects the Enlightenment philosophy, he does not land up in the end of philosophy, which others like Derrida, Nietzsche, and Rote, though not in that order, took to. He is a revisionist. He takes to something like understanding, hermeneutics, and then works out a very important, complex, and a very, very creative idea of the hermeneutical tradition. And then that's the important contribution of Gadamer. Thank you.